They say sometimes silence speaks louder than screams. Sometimes leaving is not weakness, it is courage disguised in quiet strength. Her name was Evelyn. She was 40 years old, graceful, calm, and known among her neighbors in the small town of Oregon as the woman who always smiled. Her house was small, white walls and a porch swing that creaked with every breeze. She loved the sound of it because it reminded her of the days when life was simple and love was pure. Evelyn had been married to Michael for 16 years. He was charming, successful, a man who everyone admired in public. But what people did not see was the emptiness that lived between them. It started with late nights at work, excuses that turned into silence, and then silence that turned into distance. She noticed the perfume on his shirts that wasn't hers, the messages on his phone he would quickly hide, the laughter he shared with someone else while sitting beside her at dinner. One night, she waited for him to come home. It was past midnight when his car lights flashed through the window. He entered quietly, thinking she was asleep, but she was sitting in the dark. Her eyes were calm, not angry, not hurt, just tired. She whispered his name and asked softly, "Is she worth all that we built together?" He froze, unable to answer, and in that moment, she realized that silence was her answer. Days turned into weeks. Evelyn stopped crying. She would wake up early, make coffee, and watch the sun rise behind the hills. The pain was still there, like a heartbeat she couldn't silence, but she carried it with grace. She started writing again, the way she used to before marriage. She wrote about love, about heartbreak, about how strength often wears the face of a broken woman who still chooses to be kind. One morning, she looked into the mirror and saw someone she hadn't seen in years, herself. The lines on her face were not signs of age, but of stories she survived. She packed a small suitcase, left a letter on the kitchen table, and drove away. She didn't scream, didn't accuse, didn't beg. She just left, quietly, leaving behind the woman who waited and stepping into the woman who chose herself. The city welcomed her with noise and lights. She rented a small apartment near the sea. The sound of waves became her companion each night. She got a job at a local library, surrounded by books and the scent of paper and dust. She loved the quiet there. Every page she turned reminded her that every ending was also a beginning. Evelyn Grace was 40 years old when she realized that love could disappear quietly. She had always believed that forever meant something real, but life was already teaching her that even the strongest promises can fade without sound. Her mornings used to begin with laughter, her evenings with the warmth of a voice that once called her home. But now there was only silence, a silence that sat heavy in every corner of her house. She had been married for 15 years, her whole heart given to a man she thought was her destiny. They had built dreams together, painted walls together, shared birthdays and tears and everything in between. But lately, his eyes carried a distance that words could not cross. He was there, but not really there. He smiled at her, but not with his heart. Evelyn felt it. She felt the drift like the tide pulling her away from the shore. At first, she tried to ignore it. She made his favorite breakfast, she waited for his texts, she stayed up late hoping he would come home early, but each night he came later and later with excuses that sounded thinner than air. One evening, she found him sitting in the car, whispering into his phone, and the way he smiled told her that the person on the other end was not her. It was the moment she felt her own heartbeat break. But she said nothing. She simply turned away and went inside because she still believed that love could be fixed if only she held on. Days turned into weeks, and the truth became too loud to hide. The messages she found, the perfume that wasn't hers, the laughter he saved for someone else. It was like living with a ghost, one that used to love her. Evelyn cried quietly into her pillow every night so no one would hear, because even heartbreak has its dignity. The night he left, there were no screams, no arguments. He simply stood at the door, suitcase in hand, and said he needed to find himself. She wanted to ask how you lose yourself inside someone who loved you this deeply, but she stayed silent. Her tears didn't fall until she heard the car fade away down the street, and the emptiness inside her house became unbearable. For days, she moved like a shadow through her own life. The kitchen smelled like his coffee, but the cup sat untouched. The bed was too big, the walls too quiet. She walked through every room, remembering pieces of their life together, and wondered how love could disappear when it had felt so endless. But love, she learned, does not always end with a bang. Sometimes it just dissolves slowly until one day it's gone. And so her story became one of quiet rebirth. The house, once filled with silence, now echoed with music, her laughter, her dreams. She spent her mornings writing letters to the universe, her evenings watching sunsets with gratitude. She was no longer the woman who had been left behind. She was the woman who had risen. She often met people who carried the same kind of sadness she once did, and when they asked how she had survived, she smiled and said, "You don't survive by forgetting. You survive by forgiving, by choosing to live even when your heart wants to stop, and by believing that someday it will beat freely again." Time passed, and Evelyn's eyes sparkled once more with light. The world looked different, not because it had changed, but because she had. She had learned that love, even when it ends, leaves behind something beautiful: courage. And as she sat one evening watching the last light fade, she whispered to herself, "I am not broken. I am becoming." To everyone who listens to her story tonight, Evelyn Grace would say this: if your heart has been broken, remember that pain is not the end. It is the doorway through which you find your strength. And she would leave you with a question, gentle and soft, like the closing of a book. When love fades, will you let it destroy you, or will you let it teach you who you truly are?